We're taught to think of islands as the ultimate escape, a piece of land where the rules of the mainland don't apply and the rest of the world just fades away. But there's a terrifying catch to that isolation. When you're on an island, you aren't just away from everyone else, you are physically trapped by the sea. If something finds you there is no running away. There is only the shore and the freezing black water beyond it. Tonight, we're looking at 3 true stories from people who went looking for peace on an island, but found themselves in the middle of a geographic cage. This first story comes from a man named Leo. Last year, Leo was 22 and completely burnt out. He had what he describes as a colorful past, chapters of his life he was trying desperately to leave behind. He needed to disappear for a few days, and a co-worker suggested a tiny island off the coast of Maine. It sounded perfect. No nightlife, barely any tourists after sunset, and a rental cottage that was suspiciously cheap. Leo took the late afternoon ferry. The cottage was a single-room shack surrounded on 3 sides by thick, aggressive brush. The front window faced the ocean, covered only by a thin, semi-translucent curtain. It felt peaceful until the sun went down. After dinner at a local pub, where the bartender gave him a deeply unsettling look when he mentioned his rental, Leo walked back along the shore. That's when he saw it. Tucked into a small cave about 100 yards from his cottage was a single blue motorboat. It stood out because every other boat on the island was a massive lobster vessel. Back inside, things took a turn. Leo realized his phone charger, or perhaps the outlet itself, was dead. He was in an isolated cottage on an island with no streetlights, and his only lifeline was at 5%. He fell asleep to the sound of the wind, but he didn't stay asleep. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps on the gravel. Leo froze. These weren't animal sounds. They were heavy, deliberate, and they stopped right in front of his door. A flashlight beam suddenly cut through the thin curtains, sweeping across the room. Then the handle turned. The deadbolt held, but then came the banging, heavy thuds that made the paper-thin walls vibrate. Leo jumped out of bed and crouched behind the door, ready to fight for his life. Then the banging stopped. The silence was worse, and then a man's voice, low, calm, and terrifyingly familiar, spoke through the wood. "I know you're in there, Leo." The man circled the cottage for an hour, taunting him, before Leo heard the unmistakable sound of that small outboard motor starting up and fading into the distance. Leo never found out how that man tracked him to a random island, or how he knew exactly which cottage he'd booked, but he still lives in the same place, and he knows that if they found him once, they can find him again. Hashima Island, Japan. You've probably seen it in movies, a battleship island of rotting concrete. It's been abandoned since the 70s, and while tourists can visit, they are strictly forbidden from entering the buildings. But our narrator, a structural engineer, had a research permit and a guide named Teishi. The island feels dead, but as the engineer explored a residential block, he noticed something impossible. In the decades of thick dust, there was a path. Someone had been walking this specific route recently. He followed it to a room that smelled of something non-human and found a wall that was radiating heat despite being deep in the shade. Teishi, the guide, was cold. He refused to look at the room. He refused to acknowledge the smell. He just kept checking his radio, whispering in rapid Japanese. When they reached the center of the island, the engineer found the truth. a pile of fresh blankets and empty water bottles. People were living here. He turned to show Teishi, but the guide had vanished. The engineer panicked. He ran for the stairs, but the landing was suddenly blocked by a massive pile of fresh rubble. He was being boxed in. As he sprinted through the dark corridors, he heard them. Multiple sets of footsteps, closing in from different directions. He managed to find a secondary stairwell and burst out onto the dock, where Teishi was waiting, looking completely bored. The engineer realized then that the guide wasn't there to protect him, he was there to manage him. He never saw the people in the dock, and his contact back on the mainland, Dr. Yamamoto, disappeared shortly after. Some secrets are built into the concrete, and they are meant to stay there. North Brother Island sits in New York City's East River, a forbidden zone reclaimed by nature. 10 years ago, a student named Jesse, along with his friends Jansen and the narrator, decided to kayak there at 2 a.m. The island was a post-apocalyptic forest. As they explored the ruins of the old quarantine hospital, the narrator split off to take notes. He was walking down a pitch-black hallway when he heard Jesse's voice call his name from a room up ahead. He moved toward the sound, but his gut twisted. Jesse shouldn't have been ahead of him. He called out, asking where they were. This time, Jansen's voice replied from a doorway on the left, "In here." He stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. It landed on a figure in the corner. It was a man, at least 6.5 feet tall, standing perfectly still and facing the wall. It wasn't his friends. He bolted. As the three of them scrambled back to their kayaks, they heard one final sound echoing from the hospital ruins, the faint, agonizing moaning of an old woman crying out in the dark. Jesse and Jansen swore they had been together the whole time. Neither of them had called his name. There's a reason these places are abandoned. Sometimes it's because the world moved on, but other times it's because something else moved in. If you've ever been somewhere you weren't supposed to be and felt a pair of eyes on the back of your neck, tell me about it in the comments. I read every story, and the best ones might just make it into the next video. Hit that like button if you enjoyed these stories, and subscribe to join us for more true horror. Until next time, watch the horizon. You never know what's rowing toward your shore.